nice to see all the people keeping their...
I am concerned about global warming, but right now I'm just concerned about Benjamin warming. I just want to be warm.
Okay. All right. We're going to get started. Very brief introduction to Rabbi Samuel. It's a pleasure to welcome him. I just pulled out this book. This is the book from his shul, I don't know if it's Shar Tila in Newton, Massachusetts. It's a very interesting shul. And Rabbi Benji gave me this book, I don't know, many years ago, probably at one of the Chayei Shafters at the Halakhic with Rabbi Chayei Shafter, which is where we originally met, I believe. In Chicago, which is where you're from originally, I believe. And for many years, they had different people give the Dvar Torah every week. But Talmidei Chachamim, the shul has a lot of Talmidei Chachamim professionals who know how to learn. And they put together this book of the return. When Rabbi Samuels came to the shul, I believe he only spoke once a month. I think the last time I spoke to you, you were speaking every other week. Maybe by now it's every week. I don't know. But that was an interesting arrangement. He's been the rabbi of Sheratville for 25 years, since 1995. Teaches all through Boston. He's has a PhD in science, religion, and philosophy, and MA in Bible and medieval Jewish history from Yeshiva University. And it's really a pleasure to welcome him to Torah in Motion. And pleasure to have you. And Vakasha, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So first, I just want to thank Rabbi Kelman, Rabbi J, for the invitation to share some Torah with you. I am a great admirer of all that Rabbi J, you have accomplished through Torah in Motion. It's really a wonderful resource to the Jewish community, your Marbitz Torah throughout all of the corners of the world. And kol hakavod, tamshich v'tatzliach, you should continue and be blessed with good health and all good things to continue your sacred work. And welcome to all of you, whether you're showing your face on the screen, whether you're listening, whether you're fully engaged, whether you're making Shabbos in the background, whatever works for you, you are giving yourself the gift of Torah, and we are honored to have you. If this were normal times and we were sitting in a room together, I would want to learn your names, go around, find out where you're from, what your interests are, but what could we do? We're all on Zoom during COVID, and the bracha is that we can connect through Torah through these amazing networks. Despite our physical distance and our social distance. So thank you for being here. And this week is Parshas Chayei Sarah. And Parshas Chayei Sarah begins with what we refer to euphemistically in rabbinic literature as smachos. It's a euphemism. It's lashon sagi nahor. It doesn't mean joyous occasions. It means sadness. It means loss. By you, Chayei Sarah, this was the lifetime of Sarah because she passed, and Abraham comes, livkota, lispoda, to cry for her, to eulogize her. It begins with sadness, and indeed, our week too began with sadness. Klal Yisrael lost two Gedolei Torah over last weekend, Rabbi David Feinstein and Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadikim Libracha. And when Gedolei Torah pass away, we are all in Avelus. And so Chayei Sarah captures our mood. And yet the trajectory of Parshas Chayei Sarah is that it begins with sadness and mourning. And how does it end? Well, it ends with Rivka being brought by Eliezer to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak taking Rivka as his wife. And in the words of the Torah, I'm going to share the screen so that you can see the words that we all know so well, right? Vayaviyeha Yitzchak ha'ohala, and Yitzchak took her into the tent, Sarah imo, and either the tent of Sarah, his mother, and she became the new Sarah. Vayikachet Rivka bati lo liisha, they became a married couple. Vayehaveha, and he loved her. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo, and he was comforted for her loss. And so we have a trajectory from simachos to simcha, from loss and mourning to rejoicing, to marriage. And it's not the only marriage. There's another marriage at the end of the parsha, which is that Avraham Avinu remarries a woman named Keturah, and Chazal tell us that's none other than Hagar, that he restored her as a wife, even though she had been sent away. So we have this trajectory of beginning with mourning and ending with marriage. And we'll talk about whether there's a connection and a connector between those two poles, between mourning and marriage. But that trajectory, that arc, is what inspired tonight's topic that I would like to study with you, which is 4 weddings and a funeral, or I should say 2 weddings and a funeral, right? Halakhic approaches to the conflict between mourning and marriage, mournings and weddings when they occur. So I'm going to do a new screen share to screen number 1. I have 3 screens in front of me. I don't mean to brag about my riches, but I love my screens. I have the text in front of me. If you see me looking to the left, I'm not distracted. No one else is in my office right now, but I have all of your beautiful faces and names on the screen to my left. So I'll check out every now and then. And then I have the text in front of me so I could look straight ahead into the camera and we could learn together panim al panim. Now, just to go over very quickly, I know you guys know it, but Zoom etiquette. So in the lower left-hand corner of your screen is a microphone icon that is a mute. And then there is a video icon, which is your ability to remove your visual for privacy or to display yourself. Everyone should be on mute unless you're asking a question or providing an answer in our interactive study. I intend for this to be an interactive. The other thing that you need to know is in the upper right-hand corner, you can either display the gallery setting where you could see everyone on our learning call, or just the speaker setting where you only see one picture. So that's your personal choice, whether you want a picture of the class or whether you want just the person who is speaking. When I share the screen, it might make it moot because you can't see that much. If, by the way, while I'm sharing the screen, some of the text is being blocked by the presentation of your fellow learners, you could actually press the button on your mouse and move that box with other people wherever you need to do it. Okay, now Rob J, just let me know, are they able to unmute themselves?
Yes.
Okay,
Everybody can unmute themselves. Yes.
So thank you. So everyone could unmute yourself if you have a question. I'm not going to look at chats. So if you're going to use the chat, speak to the rest of the class, but I can't look at the chats during the class. And if you want to get my attention, either raise your hand electronically by going to your participant pull down menu on the bottom, or just wave your hand. But because I do want this to be a little interactive. Zoom learning always has to be interactive. It doesn't always have to be, but it works better. That's my experience. Okay, so I'm sharing the screen. Everyone give me thumbs up if you could see the screen for weddings and a funeral. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I don't mean to be flippant or, God forbid, chas v'shalom, irreverent, but I'm going to present 4 scenarios and we'll read through them quickly, right? Scenario number 1, Abram and Sarah are two 20-somethings in love. They are to be married at the Ritz on Rosh Chodesh Elul. This is non-COVID. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. Rachmana litzlan, Avram's father suddenly passes away 2 days before the scheduled wedding. What should we do? What about if it was Avram's paternal grandfather who passed away? So the father of the chassan's father passed away, right? Do you cancel the wedding? Do you postpone it? What do you do, right? They're getting married at the Ritz. It's non-COVID. Rivka and Yitzi are in their late 40s. They have been previously married and each have children from their first marriage, some of whom are grown, some are still living at home. They have planned a small wedding and a brunch to take place in Rivki's backyard on the 28th of Sivan. Alas, Rivki's mother passes away on the 18th of Sivan. What should they do? Yankee and Rachel are in their early 40s. Yankee is a widower and Rachel has never been married. They both are without children. They were planning a small wedding and dessert reception to take place in Yankee's family synagogue. Unfortunately, Yankee's father passed away right before the wedding. What should they do? Finally, Leah and Jacob have been dating since 9th grade when they met in algebra class at the Sadia Gaon Jewish Academy. When they told their parents of their intention to marry after graduation from college, the response they got was Mazel Tov, it's about time. The two sets of affluent parents who have grown friendly over the years of their children's courtship have planned the wedding of the decade, their affluent parents, and it's not COVID. 4, I'm a Bostonian. I've lived in Boston for the past 25 years, even though I say Boston like a Chicagoan and not Boston like a Bostonian. Right, they planned it for Patriots Day 2013. Some of you may remember that Patriots Day 2013 in Boston was not a joyous day. It was a day that ended in tragedy. That was the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. So you have this horrible event that takes place, right? But there still is a possibility to have the wedding at the hotel. There's parking available, right? Should you go on with the wedding in the aftermath of a communal or group tragedy? So these are the scenarios. So can someone who's listening tell me, can you issue spot, whether it's Halakhic issue spotting or whether it's kind of emotional, ethical issue spotting? Issue spotting is a process. That's a term derived from law school, right? One of the things that you learn in law school is that future lawyers are trained to read cases and then to issue spot, to figure out what are the values in conflict, what are the potential laws in conflict. And the truth is, in halacha, we do the same thing. If you've ever had a chance to read Rabbi J. David Blyth's amazing articulations of the methodology of halacha, usually they are introductions to his serial books on contemporary halachic problems. He employs this phrase, issue spotting. The posek has to develop a intuition as well as an application of knowledge to issue spot. So can people here help me issue spot, right? All of these cases are cases when wedding plans are derailed because of some tragic occurrence, whether that be a personal or a communal tragedy. And yet each of these cases that I brought also had nuances, the age of the participants, the size of the wedding, right? Whether there are children who need to be cared for, whether it's a first marriage, whether it's a second marriage, whether children are grown. So what are you thinking when you hear these scenarios? Anyone want to volunteer? Just wave your hand if you want to say something.
If I may, hi, Rabbi Samuels.
Hi, Greg. How are you? Shalom Aleichem. Tzviki, it's good to see you. Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem, I'm fine. Thank you. It's really good to see you. The issue 1B, I think, is the only one that kind of stands out because the actual narrow constraint on the Avelis is not on the Chatan Kala, but actually on a parent of a Chatan Kala. So if you want to restrict yourself to narrow halakhic issues only, then I think in your first category, the second case would probably be different. If that's, I could use.
Great. So the last, if I'm hearing you correctly, Tzvi, the last question in the first scenario changes it completely, right? Because the parent who is walking their child to the chuppah is not the one getting married. So how does that work? How does that play out? Excellent observation. Ellen, it's wonderful to see you.
Nice to see you too. In some of these cases, there's an issue of periovarivia.
Great, right? So for everyone's, to translate that,
Procreation.
there's a mitzvah in the Torah to procreate, and that mitzvah attaches when people get married. The truth is the mitzvah attaches when people reach maritable age. It's a mitzvah, ironically, that only applies to men, not women. So that's a little strange because the last we checked in a textbook, it requires both a man and a woman to produce a child, and yet only a man is obligated in procreation. For those who are interested, I highly recommend a book by Ronit Irshai on halacha and fertility, where she contends that Chazal actually, there are many theories for why only men are obligated in it, but she has a wonderful analysis where she actually contends that allowing women not to have this mitzvah, which Chazal, of course, derived from Midrash Halacha, allowed women greater reproductive freedom and freedom over their own reproductive lives. It's a very interesting issue. But you're right, there is in some cases a mitzvah of reproductive obligation, and that might change the equation.
But I should note that Shmuel's father died a week before we were married. So I have experience.
So this hits close to home. I'm sorry, I hope it doesn't.
No, that's not a sorry thing. That's just a,
Okay. Yeah.
I had some of these things paskin for me.
Yeah, so what's interesting, Ellen, about your, and I thank you for trusting this group to share that personal bit of information. What's interesting about it, if one looks in Shulchan Aruch, the very first siman, the very first section of the laws of mourning deal precisely with this case of what happens when you suffer a loss just before, during, or just after a wedding. Isn't that fascinating? Out of all the things to begin the laws of mourning with, why would they choose the case of when tragedy intervenes and derails plans for joy? I mean, the rest of the halachas make sense, right? You go from Bikur Cholim, and Bikur Cholim should always lead to Refuah Shlema, but then you go to the laws of mourning, the laws of Aninut. That's the state that a person is in between death and the news of that someone died, one of their relatives, and burial. Kriya, the obligation to tear Kriya, and then the burial, the week of Shiva, the Shloshim, the rest of the year for a parent. For all relatives, we mourn for 30 days. For parents, we add an additional 11 months because of the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Em, of honoring our parents. So it all follows this logical, chronological progression, except there in the middle, at the very beginning, excuse me, is this mitzvah of what happens when someone passes. It's a very strange thing. Any other issues that anyone spotted that you want to mention? Ellen, go ahead.
So you might think that number 4 also leads into something like Ava. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so there are different types of mourning, and there are different types of celebrations, right? So there's personal mourning, and there's communal mourning. There's novel mourning, like someone, novel, I mean in the sense that someone passes away in our own present. And then we know from Tisha B'Av, there's historical mourning, right? And the eternal recurrence to revisit the moment the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and then throughout Jewish history to relive and experience all of those tragic moments of persecution and suffering and unfortunately murder of our ancestors. And so and then the same thing with joy. There are private joys. Can anyone think of a communal joy? Right, a private joy is, my son's getting married. My daughter's getting married. What's a communal joy?
Yom Tov.
Yom Tov, exactly. Thank you, iPad number 5. I'm sorry, that's what it says when I look at the screen. What's your name, ma'am?
I'm Harriet Levine.
Harriet, thank you so much. Right, so we have a public joy, right? And when we issue spot questions, right, we could say, does a private joy become subject to or triumph over a private sorrow? Does a public joy overrule a private sorrow? Does a public sorrow overrule a private joy, right? Those are other issues that we may spot, and some of those may operate on a halachic plane in a direct route, right? Like Yom Tov cancels Shiva, and some of those may operate on a secondary route, like Ellen had referred to, right? How would it look if someone held a chasana in the hours following a local tragedy that was actually a national tragedy, right? That doesn't play out well. That doesn't play out well, right? And so that can engender Jew hatred, anti-Semitism. It could be a chil Hashem. It could show Jews as callous and uncaring. Right, but that's still a halachic issue, very much a halachic issue, but it's a secondary approach, right? It's not a direct approach. So and so all of these are issues that come up. So how do we start to think about these issues, right? Act 2, decisions, right? Where do you look? With whom do you consult to find the halakhic solutions to these type of queries? And these scenarios that we raised, which we began to issue spot, of course, we can continue to issue spot on them. These are not precisely, right? They were all fictional scenarios, but as Ellen had revealed of her own story, and anyone in the rabbinate for an extended period of time will tell you, these things unfortunately happen all too often. They happen all too often. So the idea that it finds first position in the order of Hilchos Avelus may not only be born out of a conceptual framework or a thematic connection, it may also be born out of just human experience, that these things happen. And one of the things you have to know is how you live through moments of sorrow and moments of joy. And I don't know about you, but this speaks to my neshama, because for the past 7 months, it hasn't been, going from joy to sorrow. It's been a mix of joy and sorrow and uncertainty and anxiety and serenity and disturbance. It's like been all enmeshed together. And it's been really difficult to sort out. I don't want to project my feelings about upon you, but I have to tell you, rabbis always contend with, how do you perform a funeral in the morning and a wedding later that night, when both families are people you love dearly and with whom you've built a history of relationship and shared experience. But what do you do when it's all mixed together like this? Right? At every wedding, how do we end a wedding? Some have the custom to fulfill the Gemara in Baba Basra of putting ash on the forehead of the chassan, but right before Imeshkechech Yerushalayim. But then we recite the Shir Hamalos of if I forget the Jerusalem, right? At the height of my greatest joy, I don't forget the sufferings, past, present, and future. I don't forget the Churban Bayit, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash in actuality, and also what that symbolizes of a broken and as of yet unredeemed world. And yet at the very same time, in a time of sorrow, the Chassan and Kala, Yitzchak and Rivka, they're our beacon of hope. They're our ballast, our buoy to help us stay afloat in the troubled waters of a difficult present, right? It's all mixed together. The Parsha is mixed together. It begins with the death of Sarah and it ends with 2 weddings. How do we navigate those mixed emotions, and how do we go from one place to another? So these are, real halachic problems. They come up all of the time. And we could look in Hilchos Avelos of Shulchan Aruch. So here's the Hebrew of the first siman. To get everyone on the level playing field, most of the sources we're going to read in English, for time, so we don't read it only in Hebrew. We will reference the Hebrew from times. I believe that the sources were sent out in advance. So for those who want to follow along in the Hebrew and have the Hebrew skills to do so, please feel free to do so. But I do want to read this through just again to get our grounding. So we open Shulchan Aruch, the beginning of the laws of mourning, and this is what we read. One who has made all the preparations for his wedding. He baked his bread and prepared his meat and mixed his wine. And the father of the bridegroom died. And he was in a locality where it is unlikely to resell the food that had been prepared for the wedding. And should the wedding be postponed, he'll lose the deposit. He'll lose whatever expenditure he made for the prepared food. Or scenario B, right? Shulchan Aruch plays the same. I don't want to say Shulchan Aruch followed me. I followed Shulchan Aruch, right? Scenario 2, right? The second wedding. The mother of the bride died. And there are woman's perfumes and toilet prepared. Toilet means, making up the hair, the makeup, getting the dress ready, which are not durable. Some of those will last. Wedding dress will last. Some of them will not last. The law is that since there is no one available who can prepare for them a second time, this is not a recoverable loss, not an easily recoverable loss. And in some cases, it may have been recoverable, but it's a tremendous financial loss. They bring the corpse into a room, the bridegroom and bride into the bridal chamber. He performs the dutiful marital act, and they separate. The bride and groom separate, and then they bury the corpse. They bury the goof, the body. The body is the sacred vessel that holds the Jewish soul. Body and soul together made the person who they were in life. When a person passes, we believe, Bel Emunah Shlema, the soul returns to its divine source, and the sacred vessel, that is the body, has to be returned to the earth in a dignified and respectful fashion. Right? So, however, since the marital precept rests upon him, it's regarded as a festival day for him. So since the chassan just got married, because if we didn't perform the marriage, there would have been a loss. The wedding might have even fallen apart. The engagement might have even fallen apart. So once they get married, now he's in a state of yontif. It's his personal yontif. And his personal yontif at least entails one day, deoraisa seemingly, on a biblical level, and then 7 days of continue. So what does he do? He observes the 7 days of the wedding in public, the Sheva Brachas. He could even shave and launder his clothes and take a haircut. And then after the Sheva Yemei Mishtar are done, the 7 days of festivity, then you observe Shiva. But in regard to private mourning for the 7 days of festivity, private mourning would be forbidden. And so, for example, the bride and groom wouldn't be allowed to be maritally intimate with each other. They, in fact, would be guarded as such. There's a whole debate of how you guard them, but they would have to sleep in separate chambers, make sure that they didn't succumb to the energies of a youthful couple. So, this is really interesting, right? Could you imagine the scenario? The mix of emotions. You put down all your deposits, they're not recoverable. You prepared all of the food. There's a major investment in the wedding, emotional, in terms of financial resources. You have a date on the calendar. People made their airfares, right? It's not easily, you know what? So we'll postpone it 2 weeks, right? You don't have the father to in the words of Shulchan Aruch, to arrange for the second wedding because he died, or you don't have the mother to prepare her daughter for the chuppah. And modern sources say it doesn't, bedavka, depending on the cultural setup of how it works, have to be the mother, the father of the groom and the mother of the bride. There might be the same considerations for other relatives, right? Could you imagine that type of conflict? And here it says, have the wedding, but once you have the wedding, then it's a personal yontif. The personal yontif attaches, and it prevents the personal mourning from taking place. And then you have to wait after 7 days of rejoicing while you just perform the funeral before you have the shiva. Very, very, very difficult, right? But let's keep going down, right? I think you could see my pointer. And if he suffers no loss in the locality where it's likely to sell whatever he prepared, you could get your deposits back. You could sell the food, or you suffer a loss, but in the context of Shulchan Aruch, it's someone other than the father of the groom and the mother of the bride. It's the mother of the groom. It's the father of the bride. So that there's someone remaining who could prepare for another occasion. Then the law is, per Shulchan Aruch paskening from the Gemara, they do not allow him under such circumstances to postpone the mourning rites. He buries his dead forthwith and observes 7 days of mourning, the Shiva. And then after the Shiva, some say the Shloshim, by the way, then you have the wedding. So what do you make of this? What do you gain and what do you lose in both scenarios? If you have the wedding, what is the cost? And I don't mean only in a financial sense. Or I don't mean in a financial sense. What is the cost of having the wedding if you go ahead with the wedding? And if you don't have the wedding, what is the cost? What do you guys think? What do you do? Like, this is really difficult, but like I say, this happens. This happens to people. Not all the time, but it happens. Any thoughts? Dan, what are you thinking? Dan, even though you're unmuted, we can't hear you for some reason. Okay, you could figure it out. You might need to log off and log back on. Sometimes that fixes it. Was there someone else who wanted to share something? Herbert, did you want to share something? Lauren Black, she raised her hand. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, I was just thinking this. I've lost firsthand the person. I just can't imagine with that kind of grief of having lost a parent to be able to go ahead with a wedding. I mean, I think that would make the grief even worse. I couldn't imagine standing under a chuppah after I've just lost a parent. Be it father or mother, I really don't see the difference.
Right. No, I hear that. And yet, can you imagine a time or a circumstance as painful and emotional was? Is there some type of rationale you could buttress yourself with and say, even though I'm torn apart by such differing emotions, having the wedding would be the right thing to do?
It may be halakhically permissible or something you have to do. For me, emotionally, it would be unconscionable.
Yeah. No,
I would have to be sedated to like almost unconscious to be able to go ahead.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that. I certainly hear that. Anyone have a counterpoint? I see Mary. Mary, and then there's someone else who raised their hand. Let's get Mary, and then Helen, I think, wants to say something.
I think that one of the justifications, or not justification, I think the overriding principle is that life is supposed to override death. So in any of these situations, the joy of life and the promise of new life is supposed to override the sadness. But but I'm having a problem is I'm not seeing what the difference is in these various scenarios, because in all of these scenarios, you've got people who have spent money or resources for a wedding, and all of these scenarios, somebody dies. So I'm not understanding what the difference would be and why there is a difference in terms of the halakhic response.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is that there are several potential things going on, right? One concern may be that the two sides, right? The Gemara says, "En ktuba b'li katata." There's never a marriage that takes place without some level of disagreement between the bride's side and the groom's side and the bride's side. Doesn't mean it has to be acrimonious, but people have different visions. They have different approaches. And one could imagine if one side, let's say people are investing, I don't know, $50,000, $100,000 in the big wedding, right? The wedding of the decade, even more, even though they're affluent, right? One could imagine that one side says we can't have the wedding. The other side says, how could we not have the wedding, right? Or let's say one side put themselves in debt. They took out a second or a third mortgage on their house to make a chasana. Whether that's the right thing to do or not is a separate share about whether people should be impoverishing themselves to maintain what is perceived as a communal standard of a large simcha. But let's say someone put themselves in debt and they're going to lose everything. Chazal were consistently very considerate of what we call hefsed meruba, a large financial loss. Chazal were even considerate of hefsed ma'at. But in this type of case, we're talking about large financial losses. It could be that the difference of opinion between the groom's side and the bride's side may lead to such acrimony that it'll break the engagement. It may be that one side might say that my parent would have wanted me to have the wedding. It could be that the parent actually said, I want you, if I pass, I want you to have the wedding. And there's a fascinating discussion to what degree a person could be mochel or mocheles, can forego the honor due to them. What's imposed upon them by the halacha and what is predicated upon an expectation of a show of honor. It could be that not all losses are equivalent. And I don't mean to be insensitive here. There is always emotional devastation when there's a loss, but there are sudden losses and there are expected losses. And sometimes with expected losses, there's a good deal of anticipatory grief that was exercised even before the loss happened. There are people who pass suddenly and people who pass after a long chronic battle. There are people who pass with their faculties and people who lost their faculties a long time ago. There are people who pass young and there are people who pass beseva gadola with longevity. So there's lots of different permutations, which is why we like to say that there's no wholesale halacha, only retail. Every case in halacha, you have to know the facts, the scenarios, the situation, and then you adjudicate it as best as you can. Okay, I see three hands up. We had Helen, Yael, and Annie. So Helen, you already spoke, so I'm going to, I want to hear you, but I'm going to ask Yael and Annie to go first, and then we'll get back to you.
I'd just like to contribute the difference between a marriage and a wedding. And so I think I got married a few months after my ex-husband's father died. And we actually married at Yochanan ben Zakkai in Jerusalem. And we didn't have music at the wedding out of respect for his passing, but it was the marriage that was supportive to him rather than the wedding itself. So I was stepping in, not instead of his father, but as a person who he could lean on me.
Sure.
And he had this partner now. And so that was very comforting.
Yeah, and in fact, if we look to the end of the Parsha, especially the highlight of the Parsha, which is so beautiful. And Yitzchak brought Rivka into his tent of his mother Sarah, or into his tent, and she was like the replacement or the successor to his mother Sarah, right? And it tells us Ve'aveha, and he loved her. There are very few times in the Torah or in the Tanakh that love is expressed. That doesn't mean we don't, just presume that there's love between spouses throughout Jewish history and throughout our sacred scripture, but it doesn't articulate it often. Even in the Talmud, right, there are precious few cases of what we would call romantic love being detailed. So it tells us that he loved her and that he was comforted for his loss, just like you're describing. But it doesn't say they had the big wedding. It doesn't describe how many types of sushi they had at their smorgasbord before he brought her into the tent. Right? There was marriage that was comforting and celebratory. It doesn't mention the wedding. That's very interesting. Annie, what are you thinking?
You asked if we could somehow rationalize having the wedding after such sorrow. So if it was a sudden death of a parent of either the bride or groom, the rationale, I would see myself as a parent in preparing the wedding with my child, having the joy of the engagement, looking forward to it, and really giving that enjoyment to the child who's going to get married. And the child who's going to get married knows how much their parent was looking forward to their upcoming wedding, not for the parents' sake, but for the fact that the child's going to be married and have a partner and a life. So that is a rationale for going through with the wedding and thinking to oneself, as much as my mother or father would have loved to be here, this is the path they wanted for me in life. And it wouldn't help to deter from that path. It doesn't show less of respect, especially if you're following halakha. Not if you're not following halakha, but if the halakha allows it.
Exactly. And I think that's a key point. And I thank you for making it. I thank you for everything you said. But the key point is that these allowances in halacha are not necessary, meaning the halacha is saying in the first case that if you choose to have the wedding, it is permissible to do so. And we will say that the private joy of the wedding attaches first, and it preempts the sadness in its ritualized expression of the Shiva. But it is interesting. Many of the modern poskim say two things. First of all, they say in our time, unless it really is a large financial loss or endangers the marriage prospect, it is better to delay. It's very interesting that this is not the often, and I think part of that might be from what Lauren said before about just the dissonance and the spectacle of happening. At the same time, Rav Moshe Feinstein in a tshuva says very clearly that depending on the circumstances, it may be the right thing to do, to go ahead with the wedding and to rely on Shulchan Aruch based on the Gemara in Ksubos as it says, and if you do have the allowance, it doesn't mean that you have to enact the allowance. You could forego the allowance and not follow the license given. And it could be in other circumstances that depending on the nuances of the particularities, it could be that would be the right thing to do. Okay, I'm going to ask Tzvi and Yael and Lauren and Helen, I see, lowered her hand. Your indulgence. I just want to move the share along. I'm looking at the clock, and we don't have that much time, right? So. Okay, so the question is, right, how do we piece this together? How do we come across our fundamental sources? How do we sequence the two compelling, demanding mitzvot of Simchat Chatan V'Kala, rejoicing with the bride and groom, and the mitzvah of Avelut, of honoring and respecting those who passed through dignified and appropriate behavior? How do we build a legal conceptual framework from within with which we could better understand and adjudicate these issues. Now, we don't have time, unfortunately, to go through all of the sources, but I want to scroll ahead to Maimonides. And I want to show you something very interesting. And I'm going to read it in the Hebrew, and I have the English displayed on the screen as well. The Rambam lists the laws of mourning towards the end of the Mishnah Torah. I think we all know who the Rambam is, but just in case not everyone does, Moses Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, one of the most spectacular Jewish thinkers and leaders in the history of the Jewish people. He's born in 1138 in Cordoba, Spain. When he is 9 years old, Spain is invaded by a fanatical North African Berber Muslim group known as the Almohadin in Arabic, the Almohades in anglicized terms. And they say it's been 500 years since Muhammad has died. Muhammad had declared the people of Israel, the Jewish people, an Ahal al-Kitab, a people of the book. And therefore, as long as they pay their taxes and they pledge their allegiance, will allow them to dwell amongst us in a subjugated state as an al-Dimi, a protected people, a subjugated people. And then the Almohades came along and they said it's been 500 years. That protection that Muhammad declared for a people of a testament, a people of the book, was temporary. And it's only because we wanted to give you time to get on the program, but it's been 500 years. So either you convert, you leave the country, or if you stay and don't convert, then we'll take care of you. And they made it a little more difficult. There seems to be some historical evidence because they took children out of Jewish homes and said the only way you'll get your children back is if you convert. But if you leave, you're leaving without your children. A horrible, horrible, tragic episode in the history. But that formative experience was the life-forming lens through which Maimonides was, brought up. He ultimately finds his way to Fostat, which is Old Cairo. There, at age 31, which is a fascinating story in itself, he becomes the head of the Jewish community, the Ra'is al-Yahud. There's a whole tale to tell about that. Luckily, he loses that position a year later. It must have been devastating. But the reason I say luckily is because over the next several decades, he wrote some of the most important works of Jewish literature. And one could question whether if he retained a bureaucratic top tier position, whether he would have been able to be as literary productive as he was. That's an unknown speculation. Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah makes a complete restatement of all of Jewish law, and he ends the Mishnah Torah speaking about the laws of society. And what's fascinating about the laws of mourning is Maimonides doesn't locate them in Sefer Ahava, the book of ritual practices, the book of love, right, where we live our ritual lives in love of God and in honor and deference and love of our fellow Jews. He puts it in the laws of society. So Maimonides believes that mourning as a ritualized practice and an externalized expression of our internal emotional states is not only a personal practice, but it is fundamental to the respect for the units of family and society, the respect that gives structure to our society. It's fascinating how the Rambam, the late great Rabbi, the Talmud Rebbe, Rabbi Isidore Tursky wrote, who was also a professor at Harvard. He wrote on, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, how the Rambam's choice of where to place certain laws is just as important sometimes as his articulation of the laws themselves. Anyway, this is what the Rambam writes at the beginning of Hilchot Abel. It is a positive commandment to mourn for one's close relatives. Mitzvah taseh litabel al hakrovim. And we learn this from Aaron HaKohen. Why? Because you may remember that there was a tragedy that occurred at the very end of the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the desert. Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Abihu, bring a strange fire, an Eish Zara, and a divine fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. And then Moshe expects Aaron to go ahead with the wedding, to continue on as if nothing happened, right? To celebrate and complete the inauguration of the temple and begin its ministrations of its sacred worship. And Aaron famously says back to Moses, "V'achalti chatat hayom hayitav be'enei Hashem." Really? If I brought the sacrifices on the day my two sons died, if I ate of the meat and gorged myself in a celebratory fashion, would that find favor in God's eyes? Like, don't miss the forest for the trees, right? We'll check off the technical box, but you think that's what God wants, right? This is the first case of smachos and simcha, of a wedding and mourning, or in this case of the inauguration of the Mishkan's worship by the chief priest, by Aaron HaKohen Gadol, and tragedy. Hayitav be'enei Hashem, is this really what would bring favor to God? And then Maimonides says that technically, ein abelut min haTorah ela biyom rishon bilvad, only the first day of mourning is biblically obligated. That's the day of death, and ideally the day of burial should be on the day of death. Aval shar hashiva yamim enu din Torah, but the rest of the 7 days of mourning, that isn't a biblical obligation, but it's an obligation of rabbinical force. And yes, we know that at the end of Sefer Bereshit, it tells us that when Yosef carried up Yaakov Avinu's bones to the Marat Machpelah to bury Yaakov in his ancestral tomb, right? This is the Shabbat of the Marat Machpelah of Chayei Sarah, right? It says that Vayas la'aviv Evel Shivat Yamim, he mourned for his father 7 days. That was before Sinai. Once the Torah was given, Nitna Torah v'nitchadsha halacha, the halacha was renewed. Only 1 day was made of biblical force. Moshe Rabbeinu tiken lahem liYisrael shivat yemei abelut. And then Moshe made an ordinance and said there should be 7 days of mourning. People need 7 days of mourning. And Moshe made that rabbinical obligation of 7 days of mourning for all 7 relatives for whom we mourn. But then the Rambam tacks on something surprising, something we shouldn't expect to see in the very first paragraph of delineating the laws of mourning. That not only did Moshe Rabbeinu establish the Shiva Yemei Abelus, the 7 days of mourning, but also Moshe ordained that after a wedding, Mazel Tov, B'Shivat Yemei HaMishta, you have 7 days of celebration, of festivity. The Sheva Brachos, which are Sheva Brachos, right? 7 blessings, which are a effervescence of all blessings. Isn't that curious? That the Rambam groups Abelus and then reminds us that Moshe also ordained the joy of a wedding. And it doesn't stop there, because the Rambam locates some other halacha in the laws of mourning. But before we get there, I want to ask you a question. And this is an unfair question. In adult education, there are fair questions and unfair questions. What's a fair question? Fair question is I present you with the text and we all give our opinions on a common text. That's a level playing field. An unfair question is when we play trivia. What are the names of the 5 books of Moses? What are the names of the 10 commandments? Who can name all 63 tractates of the Mishnah? How many tractates are there in the Babylonian Talmud, right? Some people may have that information. Other people may not have that information. That's not a fair question to ask. That's a question you could ask your students in high school. You can't, where they were supposed to study for that for the test. You don't ask that. But I'm going to ask an unfair question because it presumes that some of you read the Parsha. So I ask your mechila. Right, I want to talk about the narrative arc of the Parsha. That's how I began this study session. We begin with the death of Sarah and profound mourning. We hear Abraham's cries. We hear his eulogy. Doesn't tell us the words, doesn't describe his emotions, but we still hear them. They're the same tears that we feel this week with the loss of our great teachers like Rabbi Sachs, and the eulogies that some of us at least have been trying to read and listen to through the week. And then we end with simcha and nechama, with joy, rejoicing, and consolation, with the marriage of Yitzchak to Rivka, and with the marriage of Abraham to Keturah, who may indeed be, as Chazal tell us, right? Chazal tell us it's Hagar. Okay. What happens in the middle? What's the connection in that narrative arc? What's the apex of that going from the depths and ending at the heights? Maybe that's not the, or yeah, I guess we could view it as a hill, right? What connects them? What gets us there? What's the primary story in the middle of Parshas Chayei Sarah? Debbie, were you raising your hand? But you have to unmute yourself, my friend. We can't hear you.
Getting the wife, looking for the wife for Eliezer, the wedding.
Looking for the wife for Eliezer.
For Yitzchak.
For Yitzchak, Eliezer, right. His shlichus, his mission. But let me go a little further. What is at the heart of that story? What is the litmus test to decide who is fit to marry into the household of Abraham?
The act of chesed with the water.
The act of chesed, right? He was on the lookout for an act of chesed. Now, my friends, for the last source that I want to show you. The Rambam in the 14th chapter of Hilchos Avel, towards its very end, says like this. Mitzvat asel shel divrehem. There is a positive commandment of rabbinic origin. Lebakir cholim, to visit the sick. Lenachem avelim, to comfort mourners. Lahotzi hamet, to prepare for a funeral. Lahachnis hakala, to prepare for a bride. Lelavos haorchim, to escort guests, make sure they get home safely. Lehithasek b'kol tzorchei hakvura, to attend to all of the needs of the burial. Laseit ala kotev, to carry the bier on your shoulder. Leilech lefonav, to walk before the bier. Lispod v'lachpor v'likfor, to eulogize, to bury, and to fill in. V'chein, and also l'sameach hakala ve'achason, to cause the bride and the groom to rejoice. L'sa'adem b'chol tzorcheihem, to provide all of their needs, to feed them. And all of these examples are gemilut chasadim shebegufo, acts of kindness that we perform with our body as opposed to with our checkbook. She'ein lehem shiur, that have no minimum or maximum. Earlier this year, we lost our great teacher, my personal teacher, Rabbi Norman Lamb, of blessed memory, the former president and chancellor of Yeshiva University. And I remember Rabbi Lamb once asking us, which is harder, to perform a mitzvah that has a shiur or a mitzvah that has no shiur, no fixed measure? And, we started saying, well, it depends on the measure, how difficult it is and all this. And he said, no. He said, a mitzvah without a measure is always more difficult, because on the one hand, yes, you could say that you only need to do a little bit to fulfill it. On the other hand, you're never done with the mitzvah. You are never done doing kindness. You are never done doing chesed. It has no shiur. Yeah, you could get away with a tiny bit, but you're always incomplete. And then the Rambam writes, even though all these mitzvahs are from the rabbis, the truth is they're rabbinical articulations of the fulfillment of a biblical mitzvah that is a inclusive, encapsulating meta mitzvah, hein bichlal behavta l'reacha kamocha, the mitzvah of loving your neighbor as you love yourself. Kol hadvarim she'ata rotzeh she'yaseh otam la'acherim, all of the things that you want done to you, you should do for others. Aseh ata otam la'achicha b'torah, mitzvahs you should do for your co-religionists, you should do for other people. What jumps out at you from this halacha as refined and shared with the Rambam at the very end of the laws of mourning? What two groups of mitzvahs jump out at you? Am I the only one who noticed? It has a bunch of specific acts to help bury someone and to comfort mourners. And at the same time, what else? Marriage, right?
Marriage. The marriage is right afterward.
Marriage, to make the bride and groom happy. There's only one mitzvah at a wedding. It's not to make the parents happy. It's not to make the caterer happy. Even though, of course, who doesn't want happy parents and a happy caterer? The mitzvah is to make the bride and groom happy. That is the mitzvah d'oraisa. When a couple comes to me and says, will you perform our chasana? Will you be our Masader Kedushin? I said, it will be my honor. Let's talk about it. I'll tell you what I do, and you'll tell me if it meets your needs. And if it doesn't, no problem. You could go elsewhere. That's okay. But I also say, if you change your mind and you need me to wash the dishes, I'm happy to do that too, as long as it makes you happy. That's the mitzvah of the day, right? So, and what are these all specific expressions of? Harehen bichlal ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. These are fulfilling the mitzvah of loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. These are gemilut chasadim shebegufo, the best type of chesed. The chesed that Tehillim says knits up our world, olam chesed yiboneh. The chesed that we perform in person, that we create relationship through. The chesed that one person performs for another. So what is the connector between the loss that is presented at the beginning of our parsha and the joy and consolation at the end of our parsha? Chesed. What are the two groups of mitzvahs that find themselves beginning the laws of Avelut, that Maimonides himself mentions as both takanas of Moshe Rabbeinu, decrees of Moshe Rabbeinu, both of which are the primary expressions of Gemilut Chasadim Shebegufo, of acts of kindness, expressions of consolation, to honor the survivors, of respect and dignity afforded for the Chesed Shalemet of those who passed before, and of reaffirming life and getting a new couple started who hopefully will be blessed with, if that's what they want for themselves, children, right, to fulfill the mitzvah of Puruvu and perpetuate creation and the next generation in that way. And the link between these two is chesed. And so when we get back to the question of what happens when there's a conflict between the two, right, the halacha starts to issue spot. The halacha starts to say, okay, how do we weigh private mourning and public joy and private mourning and public joy? How does this fit into the nuances of the case? What's the cost of missing the wedding? What's the opportunity and the necessity of foregoing the wedding? What is the meta orientation that drives that halakhic exploration? What do you think it is? What's the connecting dot that from the posek to the shoel or shoelis, from the person who paskins to the person who asks the question? What is the orienting framework when there's a conflict between loss and gain, when there's a conflict between marriage and mourning? Chesed. Chesed, right? What is the kindness that will help navigate the conflicting and turmoil of emotions attending loss and attending new beginnings? So, that is the meta orientation of the halacha that's involved. There's a lot of details. We don't have the time to go through all the details, but we don't miss the forest for the trees, right? The kindness and the compassion is what undergirds the whole exploration. And we learn that from our parsha, because ultimately the parsha takes us from mourning to marriage, from sadness to joy. And the link there too is kindness. Thank you for studying with me. I wish you all a good Shabbos, good health, good welfare, mental welfare, physical welfare, Shalom al Yisrael, peace for Israel, for all humanity. Good to see you. Roger,
Amazing.
any closing?
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Rabbi Benji.
Wonderful class. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I might say, I think, we've had probably about 250 classes or so since the pandemic, struck. I think you had more engagement with the audience in any of our other class. I mean, that was, of course, a calculated decision. It was very interesting to see. I haven't really seen the old class, so just yasher koach for that alone. And thank you.
Jay, there's the text on the page, and there's the Sifrei Torah that are displayed on the screen in front of us.
No, I understand. I'm just commenting. It's very hard on Zoom to create interactive, especially when it's a little bit of a bigger crowd. With 8-10 people, it's not hard to do. But
it is. But so, I'll close with Rabbi Sachs's A Letter in the Scroll. Right, he quotes the Baal Shem Tov. Every Jew is a letter in the scroll. Together, when we learn together, we make a word. At any given time, we might combine those words into a sentence. Across generations, we combine sentences into paragraphs, and then that makes the Torah. So, right, we can't forget the text within for the text on the screen. We need both of them.
Yeah, amazing.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Next Thursday, Rabbi Michael Whitman from Montreal will be giving the Parsha Shir, and then the regular schedule during the week, Menachem Liebtag, 11 a.m. Sunday morning, and we look forward to learning with everybody next week and continuing, and have a Shabbat Shalom, be well, be healthy, and we look forward to inviting your friends to come and join us. And Rabbi Benji, I hope all is well in Boston, or I don't know, how far is Newton from Boston? I must say, I don't know exactly the geographical share in Newton. I don't know where they are exactly in reference to each other.
Boston is very compact. We're walkable to Brighton, which is part of Boston. It's 15 minutes to the airport. Sharon's probably 20 minutes on the highway without traffic.
Okay.
And we're a big city and a small Orthodox Jewish community, so
right.
It's the best.
We were in Brighton, right? The Maimonides is in Brighton. That's the part that Boston only really.
Brookline.
Oh, Brookline. Okay, right. Okay. So how far are you from there?
Also walkable, the same Eruv.
Oh,
same Eruv.
Okay, very good. Okay, Laila Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very
Rabbi
much.
Samuels, do you teach other classes online?
I do, Yael. I teach classes through my synagogue, and I teach classes through our federation.
Okay, I would like to. Can I just find you if I Google it through Newton, Mass?
Well, I'm happy to connect you, and you could find me online. But I also want to encourage you to take the fine array of classes that are offered through Torah in Motion.
Baruch Hashem, we're all working all together for the same purpose. I say,
this is my
often
fifth
partner
class
with other
today.
organizations, and I'm happy wherever people want to learn Torah. We love being a source and providing many shiurim, but other people provide shiurim, and it's great that other people want to go to. So that's great. If whatever works.
I would like to ask one question of Rabbi Salma, if I may.
Please, Gershon.
Since there is an option of having the wedding or not, if God forbid there is a patira, doesn't that create a problem? Because it means that somebody who goes ahead with the wedding is kivyochel showing lack of respect to the mate, because he has the option of canceling.
That's why it's fraught. It is. At the same time, like I said, it depends on the situation. There's no question that there are times when having the wedding is the right thing to do, despite the incredible mixed emotions of the moment. And since the Halakhic gives license, and an Orthodox couple and family would appeal to their rabbi and consult with a posek, to get the proper psak, right? So if the halacha says you can go ahead with the wedding, I think it would be inappropriately judgmental for anyone to say that they're showing disrespect to the.
But didn't you tell it? Didn't I understand you to say that this the option is a later development in the halacha? Originally, there wasn't the option. Am I wrong?
Oh, I really didn't set it in a historical framework. I don't know. The Gemara in Ksubas Daf Gimel and Daf Dalet is the one that originally raises this question. And similarly, the Gemara in Moed Katan has a different but similar type of conflict of, I bring you the source sheet, of what happens when someone has a loss and it's Yantif. I will tell you, my dear beloved late mother died on Pesach. On the first morning of Pesach, and we buried her on Chol HaMoed, and I only started Shiva after Chol HaMoed, after Yontif, and I waited, right? So it, that happens, that people's personal mourning is co-opted by, and it feels strange. It's like, how could I go ahead with Yontif and go to shul and have best of meals with my family when I haven't sat Shiva yet? So, the opposite also happens, where we say that the joy of the community, because someone's always dying somewhere, right? If people's personal mourning trumps people's communal joys, then we'll always have the communal joy being compromised.
I'd like to say that Rabbi Lamb's diuk that you mentioned about the difficulty of Dvarim she'ein lahem shiur being difficult because they ein lahem shiur applies really to the answer to my question that I asked you. Because
yes,
it's become something that ein lo shiur.
I love that. That is such a beautiful, profound articulation, that both mourning and joy are Dvarim she'ein lahem shiur. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that. Helen,
Also, yeah.
Helen,
No, I was just going to add that, Gershon, that of course at times the person who passes away would want the wedding to go on. I mean, I don't know how much in fact that plays in, but there's a whole discussion in general. Can the mate say, you don't have to mourn for me? How much he can be negate the kavod that is due to him? But you see lahavdil, often you see athletes play. That's the day their father dies. I remember Brett Favre did that, I think, 1 year for Green Bay, and they say no, that's what their parents would have wanted. They go from the funeral to the football game. So we consider that inappropriate, but a wedding might be appropriate for something, perhaps in that situation where that is what the father would have wanted. So it is complicated.
Thank you.
If I can add that, I think, that
Very
idea.
good. Very good.
Rabbi Samuels, can I ask something?
please, Helen.
It's actually Harriet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep calling you Helen.
Just for information, I'm actually Yakir Levine's mother. And so we have met in person.
Are you in Boca or are you in
I'm in New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey now. Yes. Anyway, it's Cheryl's parents who spend more time in Boca.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for straightening that.
Okay. No, but I have a place there too. I just don't spend as much time. At any rate, my question was, in those first 4 scenarios that you outlined, in terms of the different couples, would there be a difference? I mean, I understand the halacha does not require a couple to get married, under the circumstances of the death of a parent or whatever, if somebody else is available to the preparations or whatever, it's more that they're allowed. But is that true for all the couples, even for the second case? That is true for every marriage, or that is true because in some ways, I mean, I asked in the chat, it seems that a wedding has a communal feel to it as well. I mean, the marriage is a continuity for a community when it's a young couple getting married.
So your question is excellent. And I would say that there are competing legal philosophies that emerge from different poskim. So some poskim are very limited by the either the code or the case law, meaning what has been articulated. So the Gemara says the father of the groom, the mother of the bride, that's the limit of the law, right? Other people are trying to analyze it more conceptually and then say it's lav davka. It doesn't necessarily have to be the father of the groom and the mother of the bride. Cultures change, times change. Right. The question is, what are the pressure points to continue? What can be lost and what could be foregone? And so, as Ellen put in the chat, which I just glanced at, right? In some circles, she's absolutely right. The wedding goes on, and it's the exception not to go on with the wedding. And yet, if one looks in the textbook Halakhic manuals on the laws of mourning, the textbooks all say in current times, we forego the wedding unless in extraordinary circumstances. And that itself is a fascinating phenomenon of when you have Halakhic manuals that present a more stringent opinion, but the truth is in practice, everyone's going lenient. And that sometimes is a market phenomenon as well, the difference between the widespread practice and the textbook adjudication. But what I would say is that the halacha does indeed, per your question, differentiate. Is there a mitzvah of puruvud? Do small children have to be taken care of, right? If the children are grown. If it was a backyard wedding and you're going to lose a couple $1,000s, actually a backyard wedding doesn't necessarily only cost a couple $1,000s. I just married a son in a backyard 2 weeks ago. And Baruch Hashem, it was beautiful. But
yes, your Kieran Cheryl told me they zoomed in.
Yeah.
You had to get off the phone so they could.
So, but some, for some it's a minor loss, for some it's a major loss, right? So that's why I said there's no wholesale halacha. Everything is nuanced to the particulars of the case. And there's a difference in people's emotional state too, and we're all horrible prognosticators of our emotional states. We think we're going to feel one way, and then we feel a different way, and we can't figure out why that is. That happens all the time.
Okay, thank you for a very interesting shiur.
All right, Reb Benji, we'll let you go. Baruch Hashem, we also made a backyard wedding this summer, our daughter, and mazel tov to you. And yes, I can confirm it does not cost only $2,000. That's for sure. Baruch Hashem, it's good to spend money on these things, and it's less than making a traditional wedding, but it's more than people think. So.
Well, I wish all of you good Shabbos and good health. And once again, thank Rob J. for his amazing service to the Jewish people through Torah in Motion.
Thank you. Laila Tov and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Good job.